here's our host, Chris Pierce.
Good morning and welcome back to Viewpoint with Chris Pierce. I'm glad you decided to join us for a very special broadcast. This morning we will be having conversations with Congressman Lee Terry as he faces what many consider his toughest challenge to date for re-election. Later we'll be talking to the Democratic candidate for Governor Chuck Hassebrook. In an effort that we began just after Labor Day, we developed a program in which each of the candidates for Congress and for governor would have half of our program to answer questions and share with us why they would be the best choice for Nebraska. Now, we invited both the Republican and Democratic candidates, but unfortunately, after several conversations and scheduling conflicts, Mr. Ricketts couldn't participate. And after several attempts to reach the Ashford campaign via phone and email without any response to our requests, Mr. Ashford's campaign refused to participate. When we come back, we'll welcome Congressman Lee Terry to the show and find out what his plans and priorities for another term representing Nebraska's 2nd District.
My son, the Cub Scout, helped raise money to make camping safer.
My son, the Cub Scout, stood up to the school bully.
My son, the Cub Scout, volunteers at the homeless shelter.
My sons, the Boy Scouts, helped clean up after the devastating flood.
My son, the Eagle Scout, helped save a man's life.
My sons, the Eagle Scouts, are defending our nation.
My son, the Eagle Scout, became a doctor,
civil engineer,
police chief,
wonderful husband and father,
state senator.
Join scouting2012.org.
For 45 years, Family Housing Advisory Services has been improving quality of life by helping people achieve housing and financial stability. FAS prevents homelessness, educates homeowners, provides foreclosure prevention options, develops financially wise consumers, offers affordable mortgage lending options, eliminates housing discrimination, and reduces poverty. Programs and services include homebuyer education, tenant services, financial management, tax assistance, homeowner finance, and fair housing. For more information, call 402-934-7921.
Hey, welcome back. I am happy to announce our first guest this morning is the Congressman for Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District, the Honorable Lee Terry. Lee, thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Oh, Chris, it's my pleasure.
I know you've got a busy schedule, and I know you're in probably one of your toughest races that you've had in a long time, so I know that your time's valuable, and we appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
Well, and I just want to let's get into the questions. The top big story is Ebola right now.
Absolutely.
Fortunately, we've got the University Nebraska Medical Center, who's been a great partner and a great solution for the country for that. But unfortunately, we've had some problems with the Texas Presbyterian Church, and now we've got 2 health workers that have come down and contracted Ebola. What do you think the government should be doing to nip this in the bud and nip it quickly?
Well, we've got to do a lot more than we're doing, and unfortunately, we're not seeing the leadership out of the White House, whether it's with the CDC or just internationally with transportation. So here's what I think we need to do. And I'm glad you mentioned UNMC first, because they are really the only part of this puzzle that I have any level of confidence in. When we look at what should be done, first of all, we realize that we are going to have to do a travel restriction, a travel ban from those that are leaving that country. The countries that have been affected and going through Europe or directly the United States. We're just going to have to stop that. There's 150 people per day, Chris, coming to the United States from those affected countries, and I know why they want to leave. I'd want to leave too. But the reality is, as we know in Dallas, when someone comes over here and they're just not symptomatic, but then they become symptomatic over here, what problems it causes. And the Presbyterian Hospital is really I think underscored, unfortunately, the gaps in the policies. So the CDC, I think, right now is creating more concern than they are confidence. The CDC is supposed to be the entity that trains all of these hospitals on how to treat these patients and how they're supposed to dress and the hazmat clothing that they have to wear, and they're just not doing it. And in fact, they're conflicting themselves, and the president really needs to take control of the CDC and put them in a position where they can be helpful to our hospitals. More evidence-based protocols are necessary. You can't have one standard for the Dallas Presbyterian, and then UNMC doing everything right.
Well, one of the things, you know, as a disabled veteran, I noticed that one of the things that you're very proud of from your website is your support of the veterans.
Absolutely.
But what I want to do is I want to take a new look at that and talk to us about maybe some of the things you have or you plan to do in a new term, especially for our new generation of veterans. You know, we've got servicemen and women coming in from, still coming in from Iraq, Afghanistan, and now we're already talking about possibly West Africa. What are we going to do to get those men and women back into civilian life?
Well, we want to make sure that when they come back from their military duties, that they have a job. If they don't want a career in the military, and unfortunately there's a forced drawdown, so many of them that may want to make it a career aren't going to be able to. So we have to have the jobs. And the reality is the people that are in the military have a level of discipline, they already understand the ethic of work, and they all have training in some level of trade, so they're ready to go to work. The employers don't have to spend much on training them. So it's marrying, and we have several programs that we've developed. The federal government, the state, the city of Omaha has a great program that matches veterans with employers, and that's what is necessary. But the other part of it is if they did see combat, and even if they didn't, some are coming back with PTSD. So we want to make sure that they have the health care, appropriate health care for their needs at their disposal, and that's why we have to have a discussion about our VA hospital. High quality of care, really poor conditions of infrastructure in the building, and so we're going to have to do something different.
So let's talk about something that's got some positive news, and that's Nebraska over the last several years, especially during the recession, really had low unemployment compared to the rest of the country. But the one exception to that is our North Omaha community.
Absolutely.
In some instances, it's record unemployment. What can you do? What will you do for that specific community that's in our district to get some jobs, get some investment, not just in Omaha, but in that community? Because we can do jobs around the country, around our city, but transportation is a problem in Omaha, as you know.
Yeah. Chris, you nailed it. We have a 3.9%, 4% unemployment in the Omaha area, and employers all over the city are begging for employees. But then when you look at North Omaha, specifically men 18 to 30, it's nearly a 30% unemployment rate. And we have to look at the failures that our society is participating in. We didn't educate those folks. We didn't force them to stay in school. And so now they lack the skills necessary at so many different levels. And so working with that population, which we have to do, means pretty solid, comprehensive workforce training. But the other part of that is we need jobs in North Omaha. So what can I do as a congressman? There's not too many federal laws I can pass to create jobs in North Omaha, but we can create an economic atmosphere of prosperity and success where we do create jobs. Then it's up to the city officials, county, and me to steer those to North Omaha. In fact, I personally recruited 2 different businesses to North Omaha. Well, I shouldn't say personally. Others joined me in it, and we create a team. That's how you show leadership, is you have a vision, you get others to join you. Omaha Steel and DeStefano Tool, each waited over a year, I think Omaha Steel almost 2 years, before they gave up on the city finding a space for them. And so our mayor right now, Stothard, is working on trying to find an industrial area within North Omaha. It's really tough to find that. The previous administration didn't have any desire to do that. At least Mayor Stoddart right now does. And once we can get a place for these businesses to go, we have lots of businesses that I think when they have to move would move to North Omaha because they know it's needed.
Okay, I want to touch on something that there's a lot of buzz about some of the TV ads. And I know during the Omaha Press Club you were asked similar questions. Yep. But I want to ask about one that's against you, that you voted to basically shut down the government. And in some instances I've read there's a connection between that and reducing funding with the CDC, which now has created even more problems with Ebola. How do you answer that charge that you voted to shut down the government?
Well, first of all, that's just a flat out lie. There was actually 3 votes, and all 3 votes were to keep the government open.
So where did it fail? So if you're saying the House passed it.
The House passed that. The failure was that the Senate refused to negotiate. The Senate refused to do anything until that third vote, when the pressure got so high that the Senate and Harry Reid finally started negotiating, and we came up with a budget agreement. Then that was the Ryan-Murray agreement. But the reality is the votes taken before that from the House were to keep the government open.
But you would admit that keeping the government open, but there was some caveats to that, though.
Well, sure.
Okay. But as long as you admit to that it wasn't a clean bill. But
none of them ever have been.
That's what I was about to say.
But the
is there any
reality
bill
is,
that's
yeah,
been clean,
because
right?
we wanted to, there was an effort to remove the Obamacare aspects, which was, I got to say, not very successful because there wasn't enough of Obamacare in that part of the budget. But the reality is what would usually happen is the Senate then would pass it without those caveats, and we go to conference and negotiate. But Harry Reid set the trap, refused to do anything, and at midnight, the government closed, and he blamed Republicans. The press carried that message, and so we got blamed for it. But the reality then is, if you look at the VA and some of the aspects that Brad Ashford has said was caused by that, they didn't happen. There was no cause and effect to the VA not building in Omaha because of that.
You're saying that's unrelated to the vote of whether to keep the budget open or not?
Unrelated, and it's just absurd to make that connection.
Well,
it's a flat lie.
let's talk quickly about an ad that you have. I think it's either between you or the RCCC that makes a connection between Brian Ashford, his support for good time, and then the release of violent felons. Explain to me how you can make that connection, and do you think that's a fair connection?
It is absolutely a fair connection because good time was a legislative law, and good time is half time. Most states have good time, meaning you do well and you do all these things, you earn good time. The state of Nebraska is a flat, you do half your sentence. And so we had lots of violent criminals that were getting out early. Then you have a second issue with the prison personnel miscalculating, or we may even have learned have intentionally did that. And Brad Ashford knew that was occurring 2 years ago and did nothing about it. So this is an issue of leadership. He knew there were two problems occurring and did absolutely nothing for 2 years to fix it.
And that's where you make your connection.
And that's where I make my connection, is because he has an obligation to fix those laws. The public wanted him to fix those laws, and he bottled them up on purpose.
All right, because I want to give you some time to do your last pitch, but do you think Initiative 425, raising the minimum wage here in Nebraska to $9 an hour, will that pass in November?
It probably will, and many of the experts have said that it would have minimal impact on our economy. I just don't think that's the right way to help people. The right way to help people is if you're earning a very low wage, and a lot of them are women, a lot of them are single mothers. What we need to do is realize the best way to help them is to allow them to get the education that's necessary to increase their skill level, so they're not earning $9 an hour, they're earning $20 an hour. Those jobs are actually available if you have the skills.
All right. Congressman Terry, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to thank you, and we'll be right back with the Democrat candidate for governor, Chuck Hassebrook.
Selling cookies is about
The big picture. You have to have a goal. A big goal.
something you and your team
Want to do in the world. We choose where the money goes. A trip.
An adventure.
Helping people out.
helping a lot of people out.
And about the money.
We are responsible for it.
Handling it, managing it,
Tracking it. Doing great things with it.
This is business.
girl business
The biggest girl-run business
in the world.
Did you think this was just about cookies?
I want to thank Congressman Terry for coming on this morning, and again, I just want to remind our audience that we did work very hard to have Mr. Ashford on our program, but his campaign decided not to come on and share with us his priorities for Nebraska's 2nd District. But with all that put aside, I want to welcome our next guest this morning, Chuck Hassebrook, former member of the Nebraska Board of Regents, and he's currently the Democratic candidate for governor. All right, Chuck, we've got some questions we want to ask you, and like I told you, no time limit, but we'll get through as many as we can.
Right.
First question I want to ask you is that, there's been a lot of issues with Health and Human Services.
Yes, there has.
Even Mike Foley, the state auditor, has had a lot of problems and has been a forefront of criticism. Mm-hmm. What do you see as some of the fixes for that department? And at what point do you think in your administration, if you're fortunate to be elected, that we as Nebraskans can regain our confidence in that department?
Well, first of all, we're going to have to earn the confidence of Nebraskans in that department. And I think it starts, for me, with doing a national search to find the absolute best person out there who will take on the challenge of restoring the competence of this agency and its effectiveness in serving Nebraskans. So I want to get that person on board and then give them some time to put together a plan to get the agency back on track. One of the other things that I think is important in that department is, in years past, we've kind of cut back on those upfront investments that help prevent problems down the road. So, for example, we made some pretty sharp cuts about a dozen years ago in mental health services to families that have children with behavioral problems. And then down the road, they don't have those services, so we end up with the 2nd highest rate of children in foster care and one of the highest rates of children in prison. Now, that's expensive, so I want to focus on stopping problems, addressing problems early, rather than having to spend a lot of money on the back end dealing with the symptoms.
One of the other things is that we've noticed the last few years that the state's contribution to local and city governments has really reduced. We had Justin Wayne, OPS board chair, on a couple weeks ago, and he said that the state's contribution is getting smaller. Is that a new reality, or is that something you think needs to change in the relationship between the state and local governments?
Well, the relationship between the state and the counties and other local governments has really become profoundly damaged. And you think under the current administration, there's been a tendency to say, well, look at us, we're cutting state spending to help reduce your taxes, when what they were really doing was pushing costs down onto the counties and forcing them on the property taxes. So, for example, the state no longer fully reimburses counties for holding state prisoners, and that's a big sticking point with counties. So I think we need to address that. There's some other things we can do. The state passed some mandates to provide education to children who need special education. That's a good thing, but the state has to, I think, step up and do a little bit better job of funding that. In recent years, the legislature's been stepping forward and putting more money into special education, but that's one of the areas we need to address as we can.
Okay. Last year, Governor Heineman, along with State Senator McCoy and Ashford, really took on a big 800-pound gorilla, and that is sales tax exemptions.
Yeah.
To include newspapers and actually political fundraisers are sales tax exempt. Is that something that you would be willing to look at maybe reducing some of those? If so, which ones, if you have any specifics, but if you think they're okay, why?
Well, I didn't like the governor's tax plan because overall what it did was shift taxes off the CEOs and the very highest earners and off financial corporations onto middle-class families. So under that proposal, 80% of Nebraskans, 8 in 10 Nebraskans would have paid more tax, but those on the very top would have paid less. It would have been very tough, for example, on manufacturing, because manufacturing inputs would have been taxed. And so we'd have had a very hard time attracting manufacturers here or keeping our manufacturers under that bill. So I don't support that approach. One thing I think the place to start, though, Chris, is that we need to do a better job of collecting the sales taxes owed right now. And the most important place is requiring large out-of-state internet retailers to collect our sales tax. Mm-hmm. Because right now, if I support a Nebraska business, when I buy a new suit or what have you, I pay sales tax. But if I go online and buy it out of state, I pay no sales tax. So in effect, we're putting our own businesses at a competitive disadvantage with out-of-state businesses. Now, recent court rulings have given Nebraska the authority to require the Amazons of the world to collect our sales tax. Technically, we owe that now, but most of us don't pay it. And I think as governor, I want to move forward and collect that and then use that revenue to help reduce property tax.
Okay. There's been a lot of news in the last year about good time law.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, the question I have for you is, Do you think that if we reduce good time, do you think that's going to affect our prison population, which is currently 157% capacity right now? Do you see that if we affect good time, that's going to affect our prison population, and we're going to have more problems like we did with Nico Jenkins?
Well, I think we have to change how we're handling good time. The current statute provides the governor the authority to take every day of good time away from prisoners who who demonstrate by their behavior in prison, by violent behavior in prison, by misconduct in prison, that they're a threat to public safety. The current governor hasn't taken that good time away because of prison overcrowding. I will, and I'll start the process on day one. We can't take new prison space off the table because the first job of state government is to protect public safety. Now, there's some other things that we can do to relieve prison overcrowding. I would make greater use of diversion programs, drug courts, mental health courts, veteran courts, but in cases where it's appropriate, where we've done a background check and have found that these are people who with some help and supervision can get their lives turned around, but not people who represent a threat and have a violent history that demonstrates that they represent a threat to the public.
Okay. Keystone Pipeline. I can't let you go without it. It has been up, down, in and out of courts. Some of us don't really know what the stance is, but let me just ask you a very simple question. Do you support the Keystone Pipeline as far as being constructed through Nebraska? And if so, or if not, why?
Okay, well, I haven't supported it, but I want to say this. The legislature and governor have dealt with it. And I don't believe in refighting every battle every 20 times, the things you disagree on. So when I'm governor, I don't intend to try to bring it back up. I want to move forward and get this state moving forward by focusing on things that we can get together as Nebraskans and move forward. That decision's been made. I don't want to refight it. But let me tell you why I oppose it. The University of Nebraska last week came out with a study that said the scientific debate on climate change is over, that the scientific evidence is overwhelming, that the burning of fossil fuels is contributing to climate change, and it represents a real risk to future generations. And I believe that we have a moral obligation to step up to the plate and address this issue rather than just living for today and passing the buck on to our kids and grandkids. That's why I've opposed the pipeline. The tar sand oil that it would move contributes 20 to 25% more to climate change than our own domestic crude oil. So if we're going to build a pipeline, I'd rather build it from North Dakota for domestic oil and gas. That would be much better from an environmental and a climate change standpoint, and it would fulfill our responsibility to our children and grandchildren to hand the earth off to them as well as we received it.
Right, and I don't need to tell you that economic development is key to creating jobs. Mm-hmm. Nebraska has had record low unemployment compared to the rest of the country, but unfortunately, what's not happening is our North Omaha community. It's in double digits, has been, still is, even with recovery. What can you do, or what will you do as governor to look at that part of our state and that community and try to increase economic development so we can start creating jobs in that community?
Well, two things. One is to focus on small business development. And one of my concerns has been that in our economic development policy in Nebraska, we treat small business as an afterthought. And North Omaha is even treated kind of as more of an afterthought in small business development, because to the extent we do have funding to support loans and training to small business, and it's been cut in half, one of the places that's most poorly served right now is North Omaha. So I want to beef up support for small business development, tax credits, refundable tax credits that work for people who maybe don't have a tax burden this year, help getting financing, business training, all those sorts of things to help North Omaha. The other thing is that the single most important thing we can do to strengthen our economy in every part of the state is to build an education system in this state that's second to none in America at enabling every one of our people to get the education and the skills they need to succeed as employees, as employers, as entrepreneurs, and as citizens. So I want to beef up early childhood education because we have a lot of kids all across our state who aren't getting what they need at home, so they start kindergarten so far behind that the odds are against them ever succeeding in school. And we all have a stake in fixing that.
Okay, so one of the things amongst your election that's on the ballot is the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Increase the minimum wage by up to $9 over the next 2 years. Many of us believe that it's going to pass. We don't have any doubts in that. But what would happen if the federal government decides to raise the federal minimum wage above $10 in the next 2 years? How can Nebraska withstand an increase from $7.25 to over $10 in the span of 2 years?
Well, I mean, first of all, raising the minimum wage, I believe, is critical because, when I was a kid, 50 years ago, the average CEO in this country made 20 times their average workers. Today, it's 275 times. At McDonald's, the CEO makes 1,200 times the average worker. And they run a hotline to help their workers sign up for food stamps because they don't pay them enough to put food on the table. I think that's wrong. And, CEO salaries have gone up 50% in just the last 4 years. And if we can absorb a 50% increase in CEO salaries over 4 years, we ought to be able to afford some modest gradual increases in the minimum wage for those hardworking families who work hard every day but aren't making enough to make ends meet.
All right, well, Chuck, I want to give you the last minute of our segment. I want you to talk to the voters and kind of give your closing pitch on why you would make the next Nebraska governor.
Well, I think the most important thing is that I will fight for the middle class. And I have a track record of decades working to get Nebraskans working together to build a better future for our children and grandchildren, to strengthen our middle class and our communities, and create good jobs and genuine opportunity for every Nebraskan in every community, from the Missouri River here in Omaha to the North Platte River in the Panhandle. We're one Nebraska, and our state can only achieve its full potential if every one of our neighbors have the opportunity to achieve theirs, whether they live across the street, across the tracks, or across the state. So I'm going to focus on building an education system that prepares every Nebraskan to succeed, supporting small business development to create opportunities in all of our communities for people to pursue their entrepreneurial dreams, because most new jobs are created by small business. And if we want to attract our bright, energetic young people, one of the best ways is to support them in pursuing their dream of owning their own business.
All right, that's the show for this week. I want to thank Congressman Lee Terry and Chuck Hassebrook for coming on this morning. And remember, everyone has a point of view. Respect it.